Alright, so the mid-90s slasher scene was completely gutted inside out and upside down by the release of one specific movie. That's Scream, baby! Wes Craven, Ghostface, a twist on the usual slasher genre. All of this was a unique mixture that captivated audiences and somehow was able to get meta on an entirely different level, and is what has kept this franchise alive for almost 3 decades now. But why did Scream become the horror slasher darling it is today? Well, it's because it bullied those formulaic horror tropes from years prior, chewed them up and spit them right in our faces, while establishing a world where these horror and slasher films live and the characters are privy to the ins and outs of everything that they watch. A whole new way to scream. So join me, pick up the cordless, and let me know.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Kicking things off, since Scream is like a reinvention meta slasher, the characters have actually watched a horror movie or time or two type movie. There are plenty of horror references, nods, even blatant callouts.
Halloween.
Friday the 13th.
The Exorcist, Candyman,
The Howling, Prom Night,
Psycho, and Carrie.
So I'll try to touch on all of them as they pop up, but the main framework for a lot of Scream comes from 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween, specifically a masked villain, high school victims, a lone surviving Scream Queen, and the slasher rules to live by, which we'll talk about later. We're first introduced to Drew Barrymore's Casey. She picks up the phone, and the TV behind her has the blue dead screen that used to show between inserting VHS tapes into a VCR. Now, director Wes Craven added that this little detail was to symbolize, quote, "We're about to see a movie." Casey continues talking to this stranger, saying her favorite scary movie is Halloween. Ding ding, first horror movie drop. But she also pulls a knife out of the butcher's block while saying this as a nod to the big old knife Michael Myers uses in the first Halloween movie. The opening scenario is a nod to one of Wes Craven's favorite horror movies, 1979's When a Stranger Calls. The whole opening 12-minute section is an intentional homage to this movie, while also weaving in the meta nature of Scream. Casey now asks the stranger's favorite scary movie, with them responding A Nightmare on Elm Street, again continuing the meta nature because Craven wrote and directed this Freddy Krueger classic. Casey continues by saying,
Nightmare on Elm Street.
I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
Now, Wes Craven originally wanted to remove this line, saying, quote, "because I thought that would make me look like an egomaniac." But Kevin Williamson, who wrote the screenplay, urged him that this is what real-life horror movie fans would say about these movies, so it stayed. Casey goes on to threaten that her big boyfriend football player Steve will kick this stranger's ass if he doesn't stop. But right before Casey brings up her jock boy toy, you can actually see a silhouette of him in a chair outside on the porch, which is revealed in just a little bit, but the killer makes Casey play a game of horror movie trivia, with the first question being name the killer in Halloween. And while Casey is thinking of the answer, you can softly hear notes from the Halloween theme song blended into the background.
Steve's counting on you.
Very faint, but it's there. I'll do a whole wrap-up at the end of this video covering which Ghostface claims what victims, and surprise, there's 2 killers. I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you know it's Billy and Stu at the end. But yeah, during the opening with Casey and Steve, both Stu and Billy are here terrorizing them. So when they ask Casey which door they are hiding behind, it's essentially a trick question because one is at each door. That's why the first runs into the front door, unlocking it so the other can help stop Casey. Casey grabbing the big ol' chef's knife is reminiscent of Jamie Lee Curtis using a similar one in Halloween. Ghostface attacks Casey through the window, slamming him in the head with the cordless and then escaping. Now, this was director Wes Craven actually in the Ghostface costume, and she really hit him in the old noggin. I forgot how absolutely brutal some of these kills were, and Casey's is amongst the most gruesome, especially with her mother hearing her last moments over the phone. But the sequence of Ghostface chasing her is supposed to be based on Leatherface chasing his victim in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Also a bit ironic that Randy calls Billy Leatherface later on in the movie, knowing that, yes, he is one of the two Ghostfaces. There's a couple back-to-back Halloween references as Casey is crawling towards her parents, but unable to scream, feels similar to Jamie Lee Curtis crawling across pavement in Halloween 2, and then Casey's dad mentions going to the Mackenzies for help, which is ripped almost directly word for word from Halloween.
Get in the car. Drive down to the Mackenzies.
I want you to go down the street to the Mackenzies' house. I want you to tell them to call the police.
Casey's death has a couple of other horror references built into it, one being her hanging death, being similar to the iconic hanging in 1977's Suspiria, but also having a big name star like Drew Barrymore, obviously in the promotions, the posters everywhere, and then die off in the first 12 minutes is not only a franchise reoccurring moment that they keep using, but also taking a page out of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, where spoilers here, I'm warning you, Janet Leigh's Marion Crane is unalived early on in the movie as well. A little behind the scenes look of these opening sequences, but apparently, and this, I can't believe this is real, a prop master had forgotten to unplug the phone Barrymore was using, causing her to actually dial 911 a handful of times, wildly screaming and then hanging up. Obviously, confused operators called back, asking why they kept calling, screaming, and hanging up, with police being alerted of the strange behavior. I'm surprised Ghostface didn't slice and dice the prop man right then and there. Another thing was that the MPAA essentially picked apart this movie scene by scene, saying that it was far too violent. And one of the sequences in question was the stabbing of Casey in the opening. Far too graphic for them. It needed to be refilmed. But Wes Craven just casually said that this was their only take, entirely a lie, so they caved and just let him use it. A hell of a start to Scream as we now settle into our main characters, introducing Sidney Prescott and Billy Loomis. Loomis being another name that references back to Dr. Loomis, Michael Myers' psychiatrist in Halloween, and also Sam Loomis, the name of the boyfriend in Psycho. So Kevin Williamson was cooking when writing this screenplay. The way Billy climbs through Sidney's window at the start of the scene is similar to that of Johnny Depp crawling through the window in A Nightmare on Elm Street, completely intentional. And we learn he is maybe a bit off of his rocker, saying he was watching The Exorcist at home, another horror name drop, hope you're paying attention because there's a quiz later, as an acoustic cover of Don't Fear the Reaper begins to play as Billy sorta confesses his lust for Sidney. And in a way, this is a reference and foreshadowing with the song tying back to Halloween when Laurie and Annie are cruising around getting stoned, but also a little wink to the audience that Billy is someone to be feared because, well, he's a Ghostface boy. Throughout this scene, though, Billy takes sly looks at Sidney's door, obviously because he doesn't want her father to walk in because this could happen at any moment, right? Yeah, but a bit of a theory time here. I think it's because Stu is also at the house, and this is when and how Neil Prescott is kidnapped. Billy distracted Sidney, Stu snuck in, and a classic Ghostface grope and grab maneuver. It makes sense to me, but let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying our breakdowns of older movies, stab that like and subscribe button as it helps all of us out here at Heavy Spoilers. Right, back to it. High school, baby! The best and worst time in everyone's lives as we see authorities and news crews taking these deaths of Casey and Kevin very seriously. The surreal synth choir-like butt rock music, and I say that with all due respect, I don't even know what kind of genre of music this is, was something that felt out of place to me, but also very much setting the tone for the seriousness of these teen slayings. Sidney is called to answer some questions from the police force, and you sort of get a feeling something weird happened in her past, specifically her mother, but we only get hints of this right now. Behind Sheriff Burke, some of the names listed on this set decoration are actually cast and crew that worked on the film, specifically the art department. Now, Burke is played by Joseph Whipp. He also just so happened to play a police officer in A Nightmare on Elm Street. This was purposely done with screenwriter Williamson stating, so the backstory there that I put in is that he was so upset by the events in Nightmare on Elm Street that he moved to a small town in Northern California. So like, it's all connected, man. We're finally introduced to the whole Mystery Inc. gang talking about everything that's happening. And in the scene, we get a bit of their relationships, personalities, high school cliques that they maybe belong to, but the main takeaway from this scene is all of the sly hints at who the killers may be. And again, after a couple of rewatches, I just couldn't believe how obvious some of this was. First is Stu explaining to Sidney how to gut someone, with Billy basically leaning in and telling him to cut it out.
Hey, it's called tact, you fuck rag.
Then it's said that Stu was dumped by Casey for Kevin, so there's potential motive there. Billy and Stu are wearing similar black boots, which we later see Ghostface wearing, and ties back to the shaking in my boots line on the phone with Casey in the opening. Both Stu and Billy have the easiest, same alibis, both going to their girlfriends, Sidney and Tatum's, the night before, so that takes the heat off of them. And lastly, the few looks Billy gives Stu, when he basically is just giving himself up to them right then and there. Right after Stu says, "I didn't kill anybody."
Nobody said you did. Thanks, buddy. Besides.
And finally, Billy's concerned look after Sidney leaves and Stu makes the liver jokes. Again, very subtle, but all of these looks and tone in the banter seems very sus at this point in the movie. Sidney cautiously checks her mailbox, going back to Randy hearing a rumor that Casey's body parts were found in her mailbox. Since Scream was like the first in an evolution of slasher movies, very much taking a satirical approach to certain slasher aspects, the music cue when Sidney opens the closet is completely there to mess with the audience's expectations. There should be a jump scare when she closes the door, but in reality, there's nothing. We learn that Sidney's mother was brutally assaulted and killed only a year prior, and potentially these new slayings could have some sort of connection, as Sidney wakes from her nap, receiving a call from Ghostface. Quick behind the scenes, Ghostface was voiced by Roger L. Jackson, and during filming, none of the cast actually met him. He'd be hidden on set somewhere. And this was purposely done so the cast's reactions to his voice were much more genuine. And at first, his voice was entirely a stand-in, a placeholder for later dubbing. But Craven liked the intelligent but evil tone in his voice, and it just stuck. Back to the ironic satire of Scream, as Sidney beat for beat explains the tropes of generic horror movies, but then follows them almost identically, not going out the front door, instead running up the stairs. But not before Ghostface jumps out of the closet and attacks her. Now, the earlier floor creak actually probably hinted someone else was already in the house. Another nod to Halloween is when Ghostface slams Sidney's head into the floor and cocks his head slightly, similar to Michael Myers right after he stabs the victim to the wall, which I'm pretty sure is featured on the TV set at Stu's party later on. Sidney freaking out over Billy having a cell phone, also those black boots again, is entirely warranted because both Billy and Stu were there to terrorize her. Billy was the one who called her, taunting her, while Stu was the one in the Ghostface outfit. This is also picked up on rewatches because each Ghostface has a different stab style and other things like wiping the blood off of the knife. But don't worry, we'll touch on that later. Probably the most unrealistic thing is that the police show up to Sidney's like in 45 seconds flat. Response time is incredible. Billy goes to jail and Sidney barely escapes with her life. Tatum finally arrives to pick up Sidney, driving an old-style VW red Beetle. Now, this is a reference to Stephen King's The Shining. In the novel, Jack Torrance drove this style of vehicle, which was later referenced in Kubrick's adaptation being wrecked by a semi. If you want more of The Shining, we did a full breakdown on that, so check it out right up there. But now back to Scream. This line from Kenny, the cameraman, was an intentional ad-lib.
Jesus, the camera, hurry!
My name isn't Jesus.
Perfectly adding to the subtle humor Scream encompasses. Now, this is where red herrings start to throw viewers off of the scent of who actually is Ghostface by making it seem like Sidney's father may potentially be the killer. Because Dewey can't find him registered at the Hilton, he skipped town the night Casey and Kevin bit the dust. It's been exactly a year since his wife passed away, and that the costume Ghostface wears is called Father Death. Should have been Daddy Death because, hey, alliteration. The Ghostface mask itself has a bit of an interesting backstory. Originally developed by Fun World, the mask was partially based on the cover of the Pink Floyd album The Wall, mixed with the ghostly-looking characters that appeared in 1930s Betty Boop cartoon. The mask was randomly found by a producer that was scouting locations for the movie. They liked the ghost in pain screaming look and asked if they could license it for Scream, changing the name of the mask from the peanut-eyed ghost to the iconic Ghostface mask, which is still owned by Fun World today. So now that the mask was picked, they wanted Ghostface to look like a legitimate ghost, straight up Scooby-Doo style, and originally had a white robe to go with the mask. But I don't have to tell you this, there was a bit of a visual problem with the design. It looked like a KKK member, so they axed the white robe and replaced it with black, saying that it would help the villain blend into the dark better, and honestly save them a lot of PR questions. At Tatum's, Sidney gets a call which turns out to be Ghostface. Now, thinking about potential suspects at this time, with Billy being in jail, it can't possibly be him, because at the police station, there was a sign that mentioned calls will be screened, so he wouldn't risk giving himself up like that, meaning that there must be someone else or he's working with someone. Spoilers, we know this, but, here's some more evidence for you crime solvers out there. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds' Red Right Hand song plays during this transition, which is a huge on-the-nose take of what's happening. The killer has a red hand, red because of blood, but when you break down the song, it's alluding to divine vengeance, which means the Ghostface boys think that they are doing this working for a higher power. Their killings mean something grander. Once Sidney and Tatum are back at school, this random reporter tries to jump them for answers, and this is an uncredited cameo by Linda Blair, another hidden horror movie icon. If you know, you know, but if not, she played Reagan in the original The Exorcist. This was a deliberate homage to the horror classic, according to Craven via the DVD commentary. Another deliberate horror homage is the number 10 jersey Tatum is wearing. It seems awfully similar to the kind of shirt Johnny Depp's Glenn wore in the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. After the little Ghostface prank in the hallway, Henry Winkler's principal scolds the two students who put on the prank, but also is a clue to the final reveal that there are actually two different Ghostfaces. Even the blue flannel with t-shirt look the one on the left is wearing is oddly similar to the outfit Billy is wearing at Stu's party later on. But the conversation is another huge red herring because Principal Himbry has motive after his little spiel.
Fairness would be to rip your insides out, hang you from a tree so we can expose you for the heartless, desensitized little shits that you are.
I touched on the Ghostface mask a bit, essentially its origins, but it almost didn't even make the cut because Bob Weinstein, one of the heads of Dimension Films, thought that Ghostface was, quote, idiotic. The look was just not even scary. That was until he watched the opening scenes with Drew Barrymore and completely changed his tone, saying, "What the f*** do I know about dailies?" and asked Craven to move faster to get the movie out even sooner. A citywide curfew is put into place for the killer, still being on the loose, so that drives Stu to throw a big old party at his place. Now, when inviting Sidney and Tatum, though, Stu sort of pumps his fist in more of a stabbing motion than your typical excited fist pump, which is another strike against Stu, maybe being the villain of this all. Henry Winkler now has his time to shine and scream, even though he was asked to go uncredited for this role. The rationale from producers was that they didn't want to distract the attention from the younger, lesser-known actors at this time. Also, his death was added after the fact because, again, old Bob Weinstein stepped in again, complaining that roughly for 30 pages of the script, no one had died, and you know what? Someone must die. This allowed for Winkler scenes here and also an excuse for the kids to leave Stu's party later on in the film. Now there's a couple of small cameos as well, with Henry Winkler's The Fonz leather jacket from Happy Days hanging in his closet, and the janitor he talks to is named Fred and dressed identical to Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Only missing is, his iconic knife glove. This is director Wes Craven in the outfit, who also directed that 80s horror gem. Principal Himbry's death with Ghostface reflected in his eye resembles the same iconic scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Tatum gets far too meta, combining horror directors Wes Craven and John Carpenter as a fun little nod to the influences Scream uses.
You're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something.
This brings us over to the video rental scenes with Randy, as there are several horror movies shown or tossed out by Randy. First, of course, is the oldest of horror movies, Frankenstein, playing on the television to open up the scene, and then Randy name drops 1981's The Howling, along with 1980's Prom Night. In Randy's ramblings, he also goes to paint a picture of how this is all going to end and will play out, mentioning Sidney's father will show up somewhere in the final reel, he's a red herring in all of this, and that Billy is the real killer. He even goes on to say,
It's the millennium. Motives are incidental.
Which is kind of true here. Like, there really isn't a clear motive as to why they're killing people. Again, with Scream taking on this meta within meta approach to the franchise, this forward-thinking Easter egg of Sidney saying Tori Spelling would play her if there was ever a movie made about her comes true, actually, in Scream 2, because Spelling ends up being the lead in the Stab franchise. So just genius casting, or some intern was paying hella attention to things. The conversation with Sheriff Burke is all a smokescreen to who the killer may be. Focusing on Neil Prescott is obviously the way Williamson intended with the script, but Burke is also wearing black boots, the same as Ghostface. This is all intended to be a misdirect, according to Wes Craven, even with the ominous musical cue when Burke stomps out the cigarette. We're finally to the giant house party murder fest to end all of Scream, and it never dawned on me until rewatching, but the ending is like 42-ish minutes of them at Stu's house, which is a massive chunk of the film's 111-minute runtime, and brings all of our main characters into one central location, again throwing you off of the scent of who the actual Ghostface may or may not be. The fun begins with Tatum heading to the garage to grab some beers. If you know your music, this is a bit of a hint at Tatum's fate, as Drop Dead Gorgeous by Republica plays right before she opens the door to the garage, which must be, you know what, okay, that's a cold garage. But to be honest, this was always one of my favorite moments in Scream because it's the first and only mention of Ghostface when naming the killer. Yeah, the only time in the whole movie that they call him Ghostface.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
But also the comedy of having beers thrown at him and clumsily falling almost like a cartoon. The clumsiness was something director Wes Craven actually was concerned about, cutting a sequence where Tatum hits him over the head with a painting, like straight up Looney Tunes style. The stunt with Tatum trying to escape via the doggy door was a complete disaster when trying to film. Due to Rose McGowan's petite frame, she kept easily sliding out of the door when filming. It just didn't look right, like she was stuck in the door. So in order to fix this, they nailed her clothing to the frame of this, appearing to fill it out much more, and the rest is history as one of the most creative and brutal kills in the Scream franchise. Billy and Sidney head up for some privacy, and we can see that he's wearing that similar blue flannel like I mentioned in the principal's office earlier. He also casually drops a Silence of the Lambs reference, which is a bit ironic for how the events of this movie are, a sociopath manipulating his female counterpart in being showcased in the scene, urging her into doing the deed. This brings us to the horror rules that Scream lives by and makes meta commentary on. You may not survive the movie if you have sex, if you drink or do drugs, and if you say, "I'll be back, hello," and who's there. These rules are the framework of all the horror and slasher movies that came before, specifically Halloween in this example. I love how Scream blatantly gives you this formula, but the horror rules are also played into later movies like Cabin in the Woods, evolving the horror genre rather than the stereotypical cookie-cutter approach. Pausing Halloween on the knife coming down behind Randy is a great image, but also foreshadows later when Ghostface pulls up behind Randy on the couch. The phone call about Principal Hembry causes almost all of the party to bail and check out his hanging body, but if you listen closely to the students leaving, one yells, "Hi-ho, Silver." This is a nod to Stephen King's It, where Bill, one of the protagonists, has a silver bike and refers to it as such. Here, the student is driving a silver car. This sets up Dewey and Gale to find Neil Prescott's abandoned vehicle in the woods by Stu's place. This obviously raises the spidey senses. However, his car was hidden in the woods a couple of nights ago, the night Casey and Steven were murdered and Stu kidnapped Sidney's father when Billy was distracting her in the opening where he climbed through her window. Or at least that's what I think. Anyway, Billy is attacked by Ghostface, causing Sidney to run. Now, there are a couple of details in this small chase scene that gives a bit of a hint of who is behind the current Ghostface. One is that Sidney is instantly cut off through another door, meaning that this person is very knowledgeable of the layout of this house. Hint, hint, Stu. And notice some of the mutilated dolls in the attic when Sidney runs through. Whoever did this is clearly demented, and even the hanging one can be tied back to Casey being hung in the opening. And this is Stu's house, so it's pretty telling stuff. But I never understood how Randy didn't hear all of the commotion upstairs. Maybe he was too drunk, but this is meta on an entirely different level because sure, Randy is watching Halloween, telling Jamie Lee Curtis to watch behind her because Michael Myers is behind her, much like Ghostface being behind him on the couch. But Randy is played by Jamie Kennedy, so it's almost like him telling himself to look behind him that the killer is there, but of course he doesn't take his own advice. The final chase amongst Sidney and Ghostface is brilliant because it weaves all of the characters still alive where they are in relation to the house and the games Ghostface is willing to play, like Sidney hiding in the police jeep only for Ghostface to toy with her with having the keys and then slyly opening the back hatch is perfect because we see it, we as audience see it and know what's happening, while Sidney is absolutely out of the blue, no clue what's happening. Which leads us to the final unhinged reveal that both Billy, surprise, and Stu are the Ghostface killers throughout this movie. Though their motives are a bit thin, tying back to what Randy said at the video rental store, it's really Billy and Stu's inability to distinguish reality from movies. This is why they mirrored a lot of their kills off of other media and quote or even name drop specific horror movies, like Billy mentioning Psycho and Carrie in this final sequence. They even go as far as mentioning a sequel and returning for it, which now makes me think like, what if Scream absolutely like tanked at the box office? What a swing and miss like Dracula Untold and the Dark Universe cinematic universe. Anyway, Billy and Stu, specifically Stu, are dialed up to 11 for this finale. Really goofy, fun stuff, but with the constant changing of who is on top, the killers or Sidney, this drives her to don the Ghostface outfit and stab Billy with an umbrella a couple of times. Now, a behind-the-scenes look at this sequence, but the stuntman actually misses the padding on Skeet Ulrich's chest on the second thrust, and this was a genuine, painful response from him because Ulrich had some wiring beneath the skin for open heart surgery as a child, so the pressure on his chest caused serious and real pain in this scene. The final kill on Stu with the television is another great staple to the Scream series, and again following the double tap trope of horror villains in the final meta moment. Like every villain isn't actually done, they come back for one final scare, and Billy unaliving for that final scare, and then Sidney getting the final bit of vengeance for everything she went through in the movie. Now, if you have some patience, there's one final Easter egg tucked away in the credits, and it has pettiness written all over it. So with roughly 45 seconds left, this thank you section scrolls up, followed by no thanks whatsoever, to the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board. This is because production had been given verbal permission to film the high school scenes at the Santa Rosa High School in Northern California. But after word got out about the violence of the film, thousands of people showed up to public hearings protesting the filming because what they were told or sold on was that this was going to be a comedy, saying it's actually a bad look for the school and city. Obviously, this was a huge stab to the gut for the production of the film. Luckily, though, they moved things to the Sonoma Community Center in the city of Sonoma for the high school scenes, but Wes Craven couldn't help but add the petty ending in the end credits. Aside from that, Scream had some crazy uphill battles in the behind-the-scenes department before it became the glorified horror slasher that changed the horror genre forever and is beloved by loads of movie fans. So I mentioned some edits because of the NPAA. Well, originally Scream was rated NC-17 and did not secure the R rating that they wanted. That is until Wes Craven told them to view everything at the point of view of a comedy rather than a horror film. This instantly changed things and they got their R rating. But also, Scream was released in theaters, I can't believe they did this, 5 days before Christmas. The furthest thing from a family-friendly holiday movie, but they did this because of obviously counter-programming. There were absolutely no other horror films in sight, but Scream only did $6.4 million in opening weekend, causing it to instantly be labeled a box office flop. However, the buzz of word of mouth eventually blew this thing up, making well over $100 million in the US box office, a handful of sequels, and even had a ripple effect, causing caller ID usage to increase threefold compared to before the movie was released. Scream was a cultural change for the tired-out horror and slasher genre. It completely flipped the script, allowing for a meta nature to the tropes and characters at play, and allowed for a handful of other horror films, or maybe even copycats if you call it that, depending on your point of view, to thrive in the coming years. Like I Know What You Did Last Summer and the underrated 1998 urban legend Solid Flick. The idea of Scream and Ghostface even jumped to the parody genre, with a bevy of scary movie movies being made to poke fun at Ghostface and the gang, which is honestly meta in itself because Scream's original title was Scary Movie and wasn't changed until like late, and I mean late, in post-production on the film. Oh, and I almost forgot, but what victims belong to what Ghostface is as follow. Stu claimed Casey, Steven, and Kenny, while Billy claimed Principal Himbry and Tatum. Most of the time they were both there helping one another, like moving Casey and Steve's bodies, but the initial killings are what I just listed, with both having a role in Maureen Prescott's murder. But yeah, everyone has fond memories of watching Scream for the first time, or even at a scary movie sleepover, and we've all seen the iconic Ghostface pretty much every single Halloween since the mid-90s. But yeah, let us know in the comments what your favorite Scream memories are, and if this still holds up after almost 3 decades of shaking up the genre. And I'll let you know, we're currently running a competition giving away 3 copies of the Rocky 4K box set on the 15th of March, and all you gotta do to get a chance of winning this is like this video, subscribe with notifications on, and drop your memories or thoughts or anything on Scream. We pick the comments at random at the end of every single month, and the winners of last month are on screen right now. So if that's you, message us on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, be sure to check out some of our other cool videos. Scream 6, we have an ending explained for that, and then also plenty of other breakdowns. But with all of that out of the way, thank you for your constant support. I've been Jared. I'm not gonna lie, I'm very sick, and I'm glad I could get through this all. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and peace.